invited here to speak to each of you today, I was first quite honored. But soon after, I became very aware that I actually had no idea how I was going to tell you the story of David's life in just 30 minutes. David may have lived for only 18 years, but it was a very full 18 years. I don't want to speak about David's death only, about our patient experience, and how we've all been affected by David having and ultimately dying as a result of renal failure. I think that doing so would allow his death and this disease to overshadow the importance of my son's life. I want to speak to you about how David has been able to change the world in his own quiet and unassuming way, and he started this change with just one person, me. Not knowing how to fit David's life into a half hour became even more evident when I recently did my very small part at the Kidney March with my son Andrew and my sister-in-law Charity. At the completion of our first day of walking, a fellow marcher who was sitting on the bus across from me waiting to go back to camp noticed a picture on my backpack. And it was a picture of David, and she said, "Will you tell me about your boy?" I was speechless. I had no idea how to answer her. I had no idea how to tell her everything I wanted to about my beautiful son in only a few short sentences. How could I convey to this woman, this stranger, how amazing my son was? I would have needed her undivided attention for the next month or so in order to do that. So I simply said to her, "I need a minute." Then I realized that I don't need hours or days or months to sum up how powerful our mother and son relationship was. I just needed to share a memory that I have of David. So one evening, when David was taken off of peritoneal dialysis, and he was so happy to be free from that. He had started on hemodialysis because the peritoneal that he was doing now was 12 hours a day and 7 days a week. So he asked me, he said, "Mom, can I sleep in your bed tonight?" And I said, "Of course." So we crawled into my bed and we flipped on the TV set, and I always wear my hair in a bun or a ponytail, and the first thing that I did was I pulled my hair out of the ponytail and I messed it all up, and it was quite a rat's nest. And I was telling the story to the woman that David scooted in behind me, and he didn't say anything. He just started to brush my hair with his fingertips. And he probably took about an hour or so to do this, but he brushed out every knot that was in my hair. And while he was doing that, we turned the television set off and we talked. And we talked about everything. We talked about he was questioning, why did I want to give him a kidney? Why would I do such a thing? He conveyed to me his concern about my health and how he was having so much difficulty with the thoughts of this. He thought that maybe one day I would need dialysis, and he was afraid that I would die. I told him, or I assured him, that I was prepared to go to any length, even if it involved dying, so that he could be happy and so that he could live. And I turned and I looked at David. He scooted out from behind me to sit beside me. And I told him that there are no words. I couldn't even describe how much I loved him, and that I only wanted for him to be okay. And David looked at me with so much sadness in his eyes. And he said, "I know." And I said to my fellow kidney marcher after I told her this story, "Does this tell you what kind of a boy my son was?" And she said, "Yes, it does. Your son was one beautiful soul." We both looked at each other. I smiled and thanked her for asking about David, and we closed our eyes and we took the bus ride back to camp. Today, I hope to elaborate on just how truly beautiful David's soul was, how he shaped me into the woman who stands before you today, and how pure and true love may appear on the surface if you don't look closely enough to sometimes lose to renal failure. But if you choose to take a different perspective, true love or pure love can actually conquer anything, even death. David Gregory MacKinnon, he's named after my husband. I said I would never do it, but I did. He's also named after my deceased younger brother, Greg. He was born on August the 28th, 1992. And up until David's birth, I was completely convinced that I was going to have a girl. I had my girls' names picked out. I knew how I was going to dress this baby, and I envisioned our life with a magnificent baby girl. She was going to be perfect in every way. So when the doctor exclaimed, "Congratulations, you have a tiny baby boy," I would be completely lying to you if I told you that I was elated. I actually wasn't. I was disappointed, and I was in disbelief. I was mostly a good person, but I was 24 years old, a little naive, probably a little too selfish, and I was used to getting my way, and having a boy wasn't part of the plan. But before I could ask the doctor, "Are you sure? Can you check again?" David was placed on my chest. And you know, people always ask you, "Are you having a boy or a girl?" And you always say, "Oh, it doesn't matter as long as the baby's healthy." But to me, it mattered. To me, it mattered. I was going to have a girl. And then David was placed there, and I immediately loved him. And everything in my world changed. The next morning, as I tried to breastfeed David, it became evident that there was something wrong. It also became evident that the staff actually didn't know what was wrong. Over the next few hours, days, and months, David began to teach me what was actually important in life. He began to teach me patience. He gave me the gift of compassion. David had me let go of ego and all that materialistic teenage, young adult baggage that I had. Most importantly, I think that David showed me the grace of loving another person so unconditionally that it becomes hard to tell where my soul ended and his began. Imagine a tiny 5-pound, 11-ounce, sick baby boy becoming his mother's greatest teacher in life, and he's not even able to speak. It was also at this time that I began to prepare to lose David, and it would be the first of many. It was such a conflict to love him, to bond with him, to protect him, and at the very same time, I'm not a neurologist and I don't know why this happens, but my brain or my mind began to protect me, and I was preparing to live a life without him in case he didn't make it. I think that human emotion and instinct are such a delicate balance. Well, David and I lived in a room at McMaster for a little over a month, and it was here that David taught me my next lesson. Not only did he teach me compassion and patience when he was first born, but I began to feel sick, not because of what was happening to us, but because of all the great sadness that's in the world. I realized for the first time in my life that I wasn't the center of the universe, and neither was he. There were so many sick children there, and it broke my heart to see these infants being cuddled by volunteers because moms and dads had to work, nurses and doctors doing their best to take care of them, but these poor little babies were left alone. David brought me here, and this extended my compassion outside my family to strangers. It was here that David underwent the first of many of his surgeries. It was a PDA ligation. He recovered quickly from the surgery and was able to return home a little ahead of schedule, but he was far from being the healthy baby boy that I had envisioned bringing home. He continued to vomit daily. In fact, he would projectile vomit every day of his life until the age of 6. We got really good at cleaning that up, and he started to finally hit the toilet at about age 5. During these first 6 years, it would be discovered that David also had asthma. He had an eye anomaly of an unknown cause. The reflux that caused his violent vomiting was a mystery to his pediatrician and our family doctor. David's bladder was riddled with diverticula, and his right ureter was too short, and it also caused a reflux, which of course brought on kidney and bladder infections regularly. By the time that David was 5.5 years old, he had had more doctor's appointments, surgeries, lengthy hospital admissions, medications, IVs, and been poked with needles more times than our entire family combined. Yet here was this beautiful, angelic, serenely calm, like Arden knows how calm he was, and smart little boy. He was doing his very best to lead an otherwise normal life with a little help from his entire family. David begged me to let him go to school at the age of 3.5. He'd stand pressed against the window watching the school bus go by. "Mommy, Mommy, can I go to school?" So at 4, we started him in a Montessori school, and he questioned everything except the rules. He saw the world in black and white, and there were no areas of gray. He preferred fact over fiction, and he was already this little boy, a child filled with so much integrity. I'll tell you a very quick story, how much he loved the rules. So you can see his school uniform there, but it also came with a cardigan, a fairly heavy cardigan. And it was one day in June, it was the end of his first year of school, it was the barbecue, and he's running around, and you can see also how pale he is. He was beet red, and I said, "David, take your cardigan off." And he said, no, it's full dress uniform day. Those are the rules. I said, "David, it's hot, take it off." And I knew I wasn't gonna convince him. So I went and got the head of the school, and I said to Kathleen, please convince David to take his cardigan off, he's too hot. And she came over and she said, "Oh, David, take your cardigan off, it's very, very hot." And he said, "No, it's full dress uniform day." And she said, "Oh, it's okay, I make the rules, I can change them." And he looked at her very puzzled, and he's 4, he wasn't trying to be a smart aleck. "Why would you make a rule just to change it?" And then off he ran. His cardigan stayed on, but here he's at home, he finally took it off. Children such as David can often find themselves in a bit of conflict with adults. They sometimes point out mistakes. They don't do it to be rude, they just can't seem to overlook things. And a colleague of mine, who is a psychologist and an educator, she once told me that David was incredibly lucky to have me as his mother and also his advocate. I must have looked puzzled, so she went on to explain that she had never encountered a person or a parent who so fully understood their child and was able to help him explain his needs as fully as I. I laughed, but then I smiled politely and I told her, if this is so, it's only because David has taught me. That his life has so far been one heck of a lesson that has forced me to slow down and patiently listen to him and to observe him. These painful and powerful lessons have brought our entire family closer together, allowing us to find joy in the simplest of everyday moments. And I know this sounds like a Hallmark card. People sometimes say these things, but do they actually live it? I can honestly say that David has blessed us with the ability to live it. We have found ridiculous amounts of fun at the grocery store, playing a board game, just walking around our block, and even in a seemingly bland hospital room. I may get in trouble for telling you this story, but when you're in a hospital room for lengths of time, you have to be creative. And this one was a turn of events. Andrew was having his appendix out, and David felt sorry for him because normally it was David in the hospital room. And my husband and my son, David, I call them the bed bandits, they decided to see how high one of the hospital beds would go up, with the crank. They go really, really high, and it got stuck. And we all laughed, and then we realized, no, it's really stuck, and we may have to pay for this hospital bed. So David came up with the idea, well, we'll just wheel it into another room, Mom. So, the problem was it had to go past the nurse's station. So yes, my husband and David, in an effort to try to make Andrew laugh, they wheeled this hospital bed out of our room, and they came back with a regular low bed. They stole it from another room, and now you all know, and I pay the bill. So yeah, we still laugh at the silliness of that. We did our very best to find fun and live normally without feeling sorry for ourselves. We just wanted to be. David was enjoying some pretty good health, and he loved it. He was about to get his pilot's license. Even before he was allowed to drive a car, he started flying at the age of 14. He was getting better at jumping obstacles on his dirt bike. He fell a few times. My sister witnessed his face bouncing off the tire, but he still got back on it, and he was getting pretty good at it. And he and his friends even built a pretty sweet go-kart from scratch. But then, out of the blue, at the age of 15, he suffered a major gastrointestinal bleed that nearly cost him his life. It slowly came under control, but the cause was still a mystery. Later, it was discovered that David had diverticula, some the size of tunies, all through his upper and lower GI tract. It was determined that this and all the other diverticula that David had on his iris, on his bladder, his patent duct, and now showing on his appendix and other soft tissue, were in some way connected. His gastroenterologist reached out to colleagues around the world to find out what this could be. The news came back that David was the only known case of his young age. He needed to have 2.5 feet of his small bowel removed, and they thought that this would help. And the doctor did his best to convince us that David was going to feel the best he'd ever felt once those diverticula were removed, but that never happened. You can see he's on his go-kart there. David became more sick than he'd ever felt. Since David was not feeling any better, I was persistent with scheduling appointments with his GI doctor. Finally, when no explanation for David's deteriorating health could be found, it was suggested that we begin to look back at David's early kidney reflux to see his pediatric urologist again. Tests seemed normal, and his kidneys seemed to look okay, although we were told that one kidney was about 20% smaller than the other one. His bladder was still repaired with no new diverticula, and his right ureter was still intact. But before we left the office, the nurse decided to take David's blood pressure. And when she took it, she didn't tell us what it was, but she looked like she was appalled. She excused herself, and she went to retrieve a smaller cuff. And she excused herself again, and she brought back a new machine. Then she finally took his blood pressure the old-fashioned way. I don't know how you guys do it with the stethoscope. And then she went to go get the doctor. David was suffering from very high blood pressure, and we were told it could be affecting his kidneys, or that his kidneys could be causing the high blood pressure. Either way, David would be referred to a pediatric nephrologist. At our appointment, we were told that David has kidney disease, and his records indicate it's from an unknown cause. Emotions ran high, and every thought for the next few months was filled with questions surrounding kidney disease. I was naive, and I was always thinking that this was an old person disease. I figured I can fix this problem in David. We're just going to tackle it head on as a family. We were going to clean up our diet even more, and we were going to reduce all of David's stress, and we were going to continue to love each other, and we were going to have tremendous hope, and it would be perfect. That's just how it is. And I look back now on the conversations that my husband tried to have with me, and I realize that I was just in total denial. Every blood pressure pill that David took, every clean meal that I cooked for our family, every exercise activity we did seemed to be in vain. David just kept feeling worse. My husband received a call on Tuesday that David's blood work had changed significantly since his last test. His creatinine was now over 720, and he would need to see a nephrologist closer to home. My husband called me while I was driving with my sister and Andrew. I pulled over, and I could no longer drive through my tears. My son Andrew was terrified. David was at home with his father telling him, "Don't worry, Dad, everything's going to be okay. It's going to be fine."